Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back after the tea break. Uh, can I request everybody to just settle down? Hi, I'm Ravi Chaudhary. I'm part of IIFL Home Finance. I look after the technical side of construction finance business and retail business for the north. Also associated with the Green Building Initiative, Green Value Partner Initiative and the ongoing ADBTA. We have a panel now which largely talks about the promotion and capacity building side of how can we do the right interventions there to improve the green affordable housing. And I'll just, while I talk about the panel, I also take you through a small walkthrough session as to what all we have done so far under mainly the capacity building and the promotion side, and also we'll introduce the speakers after that. So can we have the PPT please? Yeah, so that was our aim when we started the whole journey of capacity building. So I'll talk about capacity building first and promotion later. So the aim was clearly cut out as to we have to bridge the knowledge gap which is there when it comes to the topic of affordable green housing. And the way we designed and the way we thought that we'll be doing this is, this was supposed to be done through a series of trainings and workshops that we are currently doing. In fact, the last one of the series is happening as we speak currently in Mumbai. So it is actually getting culminated there also as far as the workshop is concerned as we culminate the Kutumb event here. So if we talk about the, so the model that we have chose for doing these workshops is that they're being done on an offline model wherein we believe that the recall value is much higher compared to an online version, and eventually there will be some way to get this online as well for the further consumption of the crowd and spreading the word. So if we talk about, so this is largely broken into 4 courses. The first one is design, as you can see on the screen. This we started with the design, and this was done in Pune and Hyderabad. Then there was a chapter on policy in Delhi. A lot of people here that I see have attended that part as well. Then there was, then there were 2 sessions on project formulation and appraisal. This largely deals about how to calculate and comment on the feasibility of a project after we do the intervention of green element into it. And the last one, which is now getting summed up in Mumbai as we speak here, is on the implementation of green measures and post-occupancy, how does a building ideally behave and what are possibly the reason to lose the green status as and when the building gets handed over to the occupants. The pedagogy, if we talk about the pedagogy as to how we have done these trainings, is largely, in fact before that I will, so that's how, if we can, for the location part, we have put the dots on the map, so that largely tells the spread and the geography that we have done. This is the pedagogy we have used, so it is assembly of various things like presentations, there are roundtable discussions, audio, visual material and hands-on experiences, and there have been some case studies also as to what all have been already done and how we can learn from that. If we talk about the impact that we have tried to generate using this and doing this is, how we have impacted it. So all the numbers that we see here are only for the offline sessions that have gone so far, and in fact this includes the number for the training that is going on. So 225 participants in total have attended it, and there have been a representation of 79 unique organizations. If we talk about the mix of the composition of the gender, it's 33% women and 67% roughly men. And if we talk about the stakeholders, we have covered, so there was an exercise initially when we identified who are the right stakeholders for this. So financial companies, the real estate developers, the designers and consultants, government organizations, which is policymakers, and the think tanks and IPCs. So largely we have tried to cover all of them, and the number speaks for that. Then we come to the promotion part, the awareness basically. So if we talk about Kutumbs, we have done 13 Kutumbs total so far, including the one that concluded in Pune very recently. So these are some numbers which tells you how many Kutumbs we have done, how many of them have happened in collaboration with ADB, the participants and the experts that have spoken here. And under promotion only, there are two more initiatives that we generally carry, wherein we work. One is Punk and another is Disha. So Punk is basically a platform for educating the migrant workers, kids, and Disha is something wherein we teach the community about the sustainable living. So in Disha, it's essentially the RWS we cater to, and we talk to them and we teach, try to make them aware about the sustainable ways of living. So there are some numbers which tells you how much work we have done in this particular thing so far. Like there have been so many centers for Punk, so many people that we have tried to teach, so many children, and likewise in Disha. So with this we are done with the session walkthrough. Now I'll just take 2 minutes to quickly introduce everyone who are on the panel. So we have Susan Olson. Susan is basically, she is the unit head for Private Sector Financial Institution Division for South Asia ADB. She will be the moderator for the session. Susan heads the Private Sector Financial Institution Division. Prior to ADB, she was lead specialist for the Financial Institution Division of IDB Invest. Her areas of expertise in the financial sector range from microfinance, SME, affordable housing and green finance. Susan holds CFA designation as well as master's degree from Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Canada, and College of Europe, Belgium. She is she is also certified by Canadian Security Institute. Next in the panel we have Mahua Mukherjee. She is also one of the independent director on the board of IIFL Home Finance Limited. She is a seasoned professional with over 3 decades of experience in development economics and has worked with World Bank in Washington DC and has led policy dialogue and formulated investment projects in relation to UN Millennium Development Goals, which now are called as SDGs. She has led the Indian Solar Energy team of the World Bank and designed the $640 million blended finance solar rooftop project with the State Bank of India. She has also worked for Citibank and ABN AMRO in Kenya. She is currently a World Bank consultant and she is advisor to the India Smart Grid Forum. She has a bachelor and master degree in economics with this distinction and a master of business administration degree in international finance from Boston University. She also has a certification in public-private partnership from Harvard Kennedy School. We have Dr. Ashok Kumar with us. Dr. Ashok Kumar is currently working as a scientist H and at CISR, which is Central Building Research Institute, Roorkee. He has contributed to towards several R&D and sponsored projects of national importance with tangible and intangible benefit as head of architecture and planning and project leader, managed the SNIP project for co-nodal officer and organized some exams as well. He has won the runner-up for US Indo project on improving building energy efficiency, and he's the principal investigator of 2 international sponsored research projects, which is Indo-US and Indo-UK. Next we have Mr. Sanjay Seth. Mr. Seth is a senior director of the Sustainable Habitat Division with the Energy and Resources Institute, fondly called as TERI. He is also the Chief Executive Officer of Greha Council, which administers the Green Bay rating system. Prior to TERI, he has worked with Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Power, He also represented BE on the board of EESL as director. He joined BE in 2007 with the introduction of Energy Conservation Building Code, which is ECBC. Next in the panel is Mr. Atif Syed. So Atif works in the capacity of a project lead for Green Building South Asia IFC. IFC is part of World Bank Group. He is experienced green building and sustainability professional with a varied work experience across private design firms, energy consultant firms and global development organization, with demonstrated successes in the form of millions of green floor area in multiple countries and green building regulation across 5 countries. Also we have in the panel is Mr. Saurabh DD. Saurabh works in the capacity of a director in BEE, Bureau of Energy Efficiency. He is currently overlooking the buildings program at BEE and charge of BEEP. He has previously been managing BEE's standard and labeling program. He is a BTech Mechanical and MBA Finance by his academics and has 18 years of professional experience in energy efficiency, climate change, green growth and global carbon market. So I welcome all of you on the panel, and over to you, Susan.
All of the panelists could come. I know we originally had an hour scheduled for the panel, but we might be trying to make up some time during the session, and we have an extraordinary set of knowledge and capacity here to share, so we won't waste any time with further introductions. We'll dive right into the material. We will do a round of questions for each of the panelists. We have 1 or 2 for each of them, and then we'll do sort of a rapid fire round at the end to wrap up and get some conclusions that you can have as takeaways from the discussion. And I thought I would start with Mr. Didi from the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. We're not following exactly the order of presentation of the panelists, but since the Bureau of Energy Efficiency plays an important role, we had the morning session on policies and regulations, and you play in a very important role, of course, in setting the standards, setting the codes. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how the Bureau of Energy Efficiency is working from a carrot and stick perspective. You set the sticks, you set the codes, the regulations, but you also have a number of programs that generate incentives to become more energy efficient. So we look forward to hearing what you're doing to push that envelope.
Okay, thank you. First of all, very good afternoon to everyone. Look, a lot of programs are there from Bureau of Energy Efficiency on the energy efficiency aspect. Now, focusing on the building aspect, we don't have carrot and stick arrangement much in case of buildings, because what we understand that if we can make in regulations or in the building bylaws of all the states, then these has to be implemented. But in a way, when you implement energy efficiency, your energy conservation or your energy cost will come down, and that is a kind of an incentive to all those things. But what we are promoting star rating of buildings, and we already came up with a star rating of homes as well. And that will give incentive to the developers. So it will be like a market-based mechanism, that how developers will be incentivized by increase in the sales of those star-rated homes. So in a way, consumer will ask for that, I need a star-rated home, and that will give an added advantage to the developers, that if they are selling the star-rated home, then it's a quality home. So that way we are working from the incentive point of view. We are also supporting states on the technical aspects, that technical demonstrations for development of such buildings. Also, we are supporting just a meager sum of 5 crore in each state to develop super ECBC buildings. So every state will have at least one super ECBC building, and where we are paying them 5 crores or the 50% of the total cost, whichever is lower, to construct those super ECBC building. And those buildings will be like an iconic building in each state, and then others will stimulate for that. This will stimulate for the other construction. So that way we are working in this. Another thing which we are coming up and in the act, which is in the amendment bill, which was passed in Lok Sabha and which will go subsequently now in the winter session to Rajya Sabha. Now, energy conservation building code will be transformed to energy conservation and sustainable building code. And this will have all the renewable energy concepts and the green building concepts as well. So you can say it's kind of a green building code for the country, which is going to come up in maybe 3 to 4 months down the time. So maybe by 1st April next year, we'll have such code available for our country.
That's a fantastic development. I was hoping actually we might elaborate a bit more on those newer areas that maybe are a little bit less familiar for many in the audience. I think many would know BE's work in commercial building codes, but on the residential side, and then also perhaps focusing a bit more on the specifics of this new law, could you elaborate on how the energy efficiency label works in residential property?
Okay, 3-4 things I will say. First, from the commercial building perspective, this energy conservation and sustainable building code will come, which will have all the green building concepts. But in the law, we have also added residential buildings. So far, in the building laws, bylaws, we were having power to include only ECBC for the mandatory code. But now, as per the amendment bill, if it will be passed in Rajya Sabha, then all the residential buildings will also be built as per the Eco-Niwas Sanhita, which is the building code, energy conservation building code for the residential buildings. And all those states will also include these ENS in the building bylaws of each respective state. So these two things are there. Then also we are working on the thing that these star rating buildings will be transformed. Although we have already introduced Shunya labeling, that is a net zero building rating program, but also these star rating will be transformed into a green building rating kind of a thing, that all buildings which are having green building concepts should also be included in this rating. So we are working on that as well. Then from the code perspective, ECBC buildings will, because existing buildings, if they want to transform into ECBC or super ECBC buildings, then we are coming up with a certification program for those as well. If somebody wants to, on their own, want to convert those buildings into ECBC compliance or super ECBC compliance, then they can get also certification for that. So these broad things we are working on the star rating perspective.
Oh, that's, it sounds like you've covered a lot of ground, a lot of needs are being met through these new requirements. I guess it's a good segue to move to Mr. Seth. You wear a dual hat as Senior Director of the Sustainable Habitat Division at TERI, but also CEO of the GRIHA Council. And to my understanding, both TERI and GRIHA have been pioneers in the green building space and research of energy and resource awareness. So I'm wondering, since we were just discussing the concept of energy efficient standards for residential building, you've seen GRIHA evolve over the years since it was first introduced in 2007. Can you talk a little bit about how the standard has evolved to retain its relevance and adapt also to the urgency of climate risks? And then specifically to help us understand also how GRIHA standards apply for residential building, affordable residential.
Sure. Thank you, Susan, and very good afternoon to all our audience as well as to my esteemed panelists here. I'll take it from, where Saurabh left actually. You see, when Saurabh and me, we both had the privilege of working with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and building codes when they were introduced in 2007. I was responsible for its implementation in India. Now, at that time, we were, you asked about the carrot and stick. And we were also kind of groping with that how do we go about making sure that move it, how do we really go about moving the standard to be adopted on a much larger pace, and we were in a dilemma whether it should be mandatory or it should be a voluntary. And I think that is where GRIHA came to our rescue, and GRIHA became, it was a program which acted as a pull. The push was the regulations, and Griha became the pull factor by people starting adopting it and making sure that implementation started happening. Now remember that when you work, and he's already in a tight position where we are required to give compliances once the regulations are framed and they are notified. Thereafter, it becomes very important for the regulator to keep informing the government as to where the regulation is really moving. You know, what is the compliance, how much of it is being complied. So I remember when I was in the process of implementing and we were going state by state, Griha was the thing that came to my rescue, because I used to go and ask for numbers and figures from the Griha Council, because essentially Griha was based on all the regulations of the Government of India. That was the benchmark, that was the baseline. And you would not get any marks if you really adhered to the standards. If you did better than the standard, where you were really given the points. So it was a very good thing that, how do we really go about ensuring compliance, get the Griha numbers. So that became a kind of what should I call it, an incentive, should I call it a carrot, whatever. So that became the driving factor for us. And likewise the other rating systems, I don't want to kind of just limit it to Griha, but also the IGBC, the USGBC, the lead standards, all of them, we all worked together in the country, and that became a pull factor for the adoption of these regulations. Now, ever since that, Griha and consequently, that was, I think 2005 was when Griha was started to develop, and then 2007 it really came, 2006, 2007 it really came into being, and it was adopted in the country by various people. And largely there was a lot of support from the Government of India, from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, which gave it a lot of push to make sure that this regulation is adopted in all upcoming new constructions. The Griha rating became a mandatory kind of a standard for, especially in the government sector, the Central Public Works Department and the other public works departments of the state government, to necessarily adopt Griha as a rating system and create at least a minimum 3-star benchmark was what they kind of told, or they pushed for that. So TERI and MNRE worked together to create that standard. So TERI essentially worked on the creation, and MNRE supported it in its adoption in the initial stages. And there were some amount of incentives that were given by the government to make sure that the capacities, because you see, when something new is brought into the domain, then the capacities is something which you really need to work on, and they started working on the capacities. Now, and then of course they weaned off. But Griha, the good part of Griha was that it was a very kind of a tool which could evaluate all kinds of buildings, not necessarily only air-conditioned buildings and all of that. So small to big, to air-conditioned to non-air-conditioned. It was a tool essentially created to evaluate buildings holistically based on the climate in which the buildings were located, and all kinds of buildings that it was able to evaluate, and not necessarily, it was a tool which was used to evaluate buildings in the Indian context. That's very important. We did not adapt it from from some other code. It was based on the regulations, as I said, all the regulations that were available within India. That became the benchmark, and then you kept evolving it over time as regulations were tightened. So we essentially followed the pathway, followed the government, as I am doing today here as well. After Saurabh, it's me. So, we kind of towed the line of the government, made sure that as and when they tighten the screws, we also go about ratcheting up our standards and evolving it. and that's how we work. So ECBC being one, we were able to also evaluate the homes as, and which of course the regulation was introduced only in 2018 by the government, because initially the EC Act, the Energy Conservation Act, did not allow, there were no provisions for the residential sector to be regulated, so they had to kind of amend that, and which they have successfully done now. And as Saurabh said, now they have in fact changed it to a sustainable building code as well. It's a green code now, so green regulation. And we are very hopeful that now organizations such as LEED, GRIHA, IGBC, all of them would be able to up the ante, in terms of adoption. We will be able to do much better. There will be a much better buy-in as far as these green buildings are concerned. The only thing which I will probably at some stage, maybe offline, or I do not know if I can ask him a question, I'll do that later on. Where do they really see teeth of enforcement? Because they have their, their hands and legs tied. They can only regulate it under the EC Act, but if they are talking of sustainability, it goes beyond energy, and they need to, I'll be very interested in knowing that answer at a later stage, not now. So I'll stop there, and then we'll continue the discussions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I could ask just one follow-on, though, because as you were describing, the GRI has evolved over time. It sounds like a clear standard, well-established standard in India, also flexible to building type.
Yes.
And yet we spoke in the morning about the challenges of the need for more built environment in urban areas, move to urban environment, doubling in the stock, at least doubling in the stock of new construction that needs to happen. How or what could be done, I guess is a better word, to make sure that the GRI standards are applied? How can they be easier to scale?
So, of course, as I said, the bandwidth is pretty good. We've also got something which is called, for the affordable housing segment, an acronym which is Jan Awas Nirman, which is for the public at large, for the economically weaker section, a Jan rating program which was launched. We've already done the testing on a couple of, with a couple of developers who are into the affordable housing segment. And we are now hoping to build up on it and scale it up in a very big way. The upcoming GRIHA summit, which is scheduled on 14th, 15th, 16th of December this year, we hope that we are going to make some big announcements as far as the Jan GRIHA is concerned. And there will be a lot of uptake on this. There are elements which, you see, please understand, whether it is government regulations or whether it is green, whatever we talk, end consumer becomes the important driving factor. Unless and until the end consumer does not demand for it, no developer is going to give it, right? And that's my key takeaway for in all such settings. I always say that if you want some success to be seen, you need to work on the end consumer. And this guy sitting here, when he was handling the standards and labeling program in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, we used to call him a 5-star label, because he worked with the end consumers, because they could take the informed decisions. Informed decision making became very important through the labeling program. So it was a very great success, and that's where the Bureau of Energy Efficiency is riding very high. And I hope that our rating programs that we have, whether it is 1 to 5 star or whether it is LEED, Gold, Platinum, or whatever, all of those are aimed at, it's a performance label, right? And on those lines. So I think those factors are important. There are incentives which have been provided by various state governments based so that there is a larger uptake. But the minds of the consumer, you see, they always have this myth in their minds that green costs more, right? So the first cost uniqueness is where developers, they go through split incentives, all of those. So those continue to remain as the bottlenecks or impediments for its really larger uptake. But we need to work on all of these aspects. We are working. Many state governments have made it mandatory, especially in the government sector. No buildings can be constructed, new constructions cannot happen without aspiring for a rating, and largely it is GRIHA which has been kind of thrust upon them. We've also launched, so as I said, we keep towing the line of the government. The Prime Minister has announced a very big, made a big announcement in terms of becoming carbon neutral economy by 2070. Given the kinds of emissions that the built environment is, we are all aware of the consumptions and the emissions that are made by the built environment. So 2070 is what they are looking at. We are hoping that we go on a trajectory where by 2050 the built environment should be carbon neutral, and that is working together with the United Nations framework. So that's where we are working together. And we've launched a program which is called the Decarbonizing Habitat Program in the GRIA Council, which looks at that. And incidentally, the theme for this year's GRIA Summit is also aligned with it, which is towards net positive habitats. We are no longer calling, trying to move towards near zero. We are talking about net positive habitats. So we are working, we are really pushing ourselves to make sure that the emissions or the commitments made at the global level would be met soon. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to come back to the point on consumer demand and the importance of the demand side in a moment, but first I want to stick with a bit more of the science and the technical aspects of green buildings, because I couldn't think of a person with more holistic qualifications to discuss this point than you, Dr. Kumar. When I read your profile, I see you're trained as an architect, an urban planner, an eminent scientist, and also now renowned for your work in performance efficiency of buildings at the CBRI. So could you tell us a little bit more about this side of preparing specialists, technical specialists, and training experts who can be the doctors of the industry, and what CBRI is doing in that area?
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Over the last, say, 30 years, because I have been associated with the CSIR, CBRI for the last 32 and a half years, and we at CBRI start with building physics as one of the very, very fundamental requirements for architects, because Saurabh talked about sustainability, and he also talked about Griha. Unless we stick to the fundamental principles of sustainability, wherein building physics plays an important role, we cannot fulfill the requirements of the building industry. So there, right from the design of buildings, we talk about passive design measures or the building physics principles. We try to do the fundamental science and test these, these various theories into, test beds. And these test beds are basically to understand what is happening in real-time scenario as compared to the theory which we study. So once these test beds are, perfected, then we try to, replicate those test beds into real-time models. So that means it is not only the science, the theory, but the testing of that, measuring that, and then replicable and scale up that models into the reality. So this is one of the very, very important components that we in India, or we at CBRI, take into consideration. And number two, whatever knowledge that we generate, we try to educate not only architects, but also engineers and students from different parts of the country by arranging skill development programs from time to time. The topics are, varied, and it varies from, say, sustainability to building energy efficiency to climate resilient building. So I think, if I talk about last 4 or 5 years, we have trained about 5,000 people, 5,000 professionals, and about 10,000 students of architecture, students of engineering, in terms of how these building energy efficiency measures, how these sustainability measures can be adopted into the built environment to save the planet. This is number one. Number two. Number three, taking from Mr. Saurabh and Sanjay Seth, because I have been associated with several national jury members. So at PMAY jury, 2 times we had, wherein I have seen, people talking about green building materials. People are talking about innovative technologies and some qualitative measures. But still, quantitative measures are missing, quantitative outcomes. If you apply, say, one intervention, what is going to be the benefit of that particular intervention? So that means still people are not able to, give the quantitative aspects of each and every, say, intervention to get the benefits. This is the one of the key takeaways from that one. Recently, we also have jury for this National Energy Conservation Award. We just came from that. We evaluated the buildings. There also we have seen not so fascinating, not so innovative entries. So that means still we find people are not so competent or people are hesitant to participate in such competition. And also for the Griha, I have seen some of the very iconic entries in wherein I could see some building science component. He talked about Griha as one of the rating system. Yes, we talk about National Building Code where in 2016 we introduced sustainability as one of the chapters, and I think India is the only first country where in National Building Code there is a chapter on sustainability. So you can see there is a lot of efforts being done at the national level, and at the as a researcher I have been contributing not only to ECBC, where we formulated ECBC 2007, where I was associated with Sanjay Seth and Saurabh. So I enjoy the company of these two experts. But yes, there's a lot more to be done on quantitative aspects of all these things. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. I did want to ask a follow-on in that regard, because I think since you see the topic of the ecosystem from such a holistic perspective,
Yeah.
and I can say my perception coming from outside of India, it's safe to say that there's a deep wealth of science, technology, and innovation. I don't know to what extent it's being put into real time, but maybe you could just highlight quickly what you think India is getting right to build the green ecosystem for affordable housing, and what more could be done better. I know you mentioned the qualitative aspects.
Yes. A very important question. CSR, CBRI has been associated with the PMAY, not only urban but also rural, wherein lakhs of houses in the country under the direction of CBRI are being constructed. There is a Pahal document which has been created based on the occupancy, based on the survey that we carried out in the year 2010 and 11. All that what is available in the different regions of the country, what exactly is required, what interventions are required if there are existing good practices, what interventions can make them perform better in aggressive environment, in climate of say hot, dry, and warm, humid, and things like that. So yes, we have been playing a major role in providing S&T inputs to Government of India, and also to respective state governments. And whatever technologies that CSR or CSR, CBRI are developing, they are finding a place in all these developments. And I am very happy to share that even architects, when we are talking about green building technologies, yes, there is a lot of market, and yes, labeling is required. That is another challenge where I have seen in Europe, people talk about, they talk about standards, but labeling is missing. Suppose a product, if I talk about AAC block, AAC is being manufactured by hundreds of organizations, but these properties are changing, and we are also coming out with better products to conform to the requirements of Indian standards and also international standards.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to turn now to the intersection of finance and green, because to build an ecosystem, of course, all of this infrastructure and investment needs to be funded. And so, Ms. Mukherjee, you have a very strong background in development finance with the World Bank. You've also worked on some of the early pioneering programs that first touched on climate finance through financial institutions in the solar rooftop program through SBI. Now you sit, of course, on IIFL's board, and IIFL has been pioneering in trying to design green finance solutions for the builder book. What advice would you give to banks or HFCs who are thinking about doing green finance products and green housing finance specifically?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to enlarge the scope of the picture and then come back to your specific question. I think as a country, as a government, and we've had so many important things today about the G20, and the Indian government of Prime Minister has talked about the lifestyle for the environment, the importance of housing. I think India is in a unique position to sort of do a world-class housing program, green housing program, and then for that you need 4 essential stakeholders. One of them are the lenders, whom you asked me about. Another one is the builders we've been talking about. The other is the knowledge partners, whom our other panelists have been talking about. And we also have, of course, most importantly, the occupants, which will be either owners or renters. So let me come back. In order for the lenders, if they're not as forward-looking as IIFL Home Finance or other lenders, to get involved in this market, which is what you're asking about, I think the government, from the policy side, needs to do a gear shift, which is to put into practice all this knowledge that exists in terms of the standards, the labeling, everything that is being talked about. In the previous panel, Mr. Sridhar had talked about the need for a compulsion, danda meaning the rod, the stick. I think that India actually cannot afford to, within a year's time or so, cannot afford to build anything anymore that's not green. I think we really need to have, by differing degrees, but I think we really need to have some regulation where we will be requiring a disclosure by the builders. How much water do you use? How much energy do you use? Do you have you done anything to reduce the energy demand in this building? Have you done anything to decarbonize the energy supply of this building? Do you have a water treatment plant? Are you recycling water? Are you recycling waste? Are you composting somehow the organic waste that's coming out of this building? What sort of construction materials did you use? Were they decarbonized? These types of questions should be part of a standard disclosure. And the estimated savings, the estimated operational cost reductions. I mean, for any energy transition technology, whether it's solar panels or whether it's electric vehicles and now green housing, you know that there's always this challenge of a higher upfront cost in order for future savings. We've been talking about this the whole morning. And with rooftop panels, which I was involved with from the very beginning, this was a hard sell until certain business models came along, which are third-party owned business models. Because let's face it, the target group that we want to benefit from this social housing, green social housing, cannot always qualify for the loans, but other people can. And then there are arm's length transactions which make it affordable. Like if you look at the battery swapping technology in the electric vehicle, someone else is buying the battery, not the low-income two-wheeler user. So instead of having to own the battery, he is able to swap it for a subscription fee that is affordable to him. Or with the OPEX model in the rooftops, somebody else is, there's a third-party owner, and you make it affordable for the user to be able to access this. And then you can have a, after 12 years, you can have a boot model, build, own, operate, transfer. So they pay it off after 12 years, and then they own it with no further cost. Or the boom model, build, own, operate, maintain, where forever they want to go on just paying a small fee for usage, so they get access to the green technology to use it, but they don't have to own it. We have to come up with models like this in India also for green housing, because these will then, I think, serve as a blueprint for other developing countries. They're not going to come out of the developed world, these business models. They will come out of the unique circumstances of many different user categories in India. So that's, let me not, I know there's a time constraint. So if the government of India were to, for example, look at the nascent REIT, the Real Estate Investment Trust legislation, and say that we want to create a portfolio class of low carbon and water efficient portfolio of green housing assets. This is what we must create, and here's the kicker, maybe we can try to get carbon credits across the whole portfolio, so we can get an additional cash inflow from this portfolio of mixed use. Why should it always be only residential? Let's look at all buildings. Let's look at schools, let's look at health clinics, residential buildings, office buildings, retail space, everything. Because I think, as I mentioned, India can't afford to build any non-green or non-low carbon housing anymore, not a single one. We've made a commitment that we're reducing CO2 emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030. So this has to start, and housing is a huge contributor, I think 24-25% of our CO2 emissions. So let's not add any more that we then have to reduce. I think it's very interesting, the conversations the other panelists have had about whether you know, this extent of compulsion versus, and the regulation versus an incentive. And I think that if there's a quantifiable, as you said, incentive, quantifiable information that serves as an incentive, all the four corners of this Mr. Kuldeep's jigsaw puzzle that I was talking about, the builders, the lenders, the buyers in a sense who's going to invest in this right portfolio, the real estate investment trust, and the occupant who's either going to be buying the individual flat or renting it. These four corners, each of them need to have some kind of an incentive that is quantifiable, that they know by going green, this is how much money I'm saving, or I'm going to save in 2 years, 3 years. So what the government needs to do now is to quickly fund, in the way Mr. Sridhar was saying, let's have a fund, national green fund, whatever, to do a certain number of pilot, we need demonstration projects, because all lenders need quantified information. They need to know when you do this, when you use this material, you reduce the energy demand by X%, and you save this many liters of water, this much CO2, this much composting, you avoid landfills, whatever it is. We need quantifiable information. I've been on the lender's side. I know that this allows the lender to price, and so that's what the lender wants. They want quantifiable information. What else do they want? They want somebody to mitigate their risk. So if a defined event happens, then they get certain certain payout. They don't lose the whole exposure that they have. So in this fund, which people were talking about earlier, what else? One thing is it should lower the cost of funds. It should be a fund of funds, and it should lower the cost for the housing finance companies. It should also provide them with some risk mitigation. The builders have the incentives that people have talked about already, the floor area ratio, the reduced statutory taxes and fees and whatever. We need to talk to them more to find out what incentives actually make sense for them. For the owners, we know owners and occupants, mainly reduced utility bills, better comfort, better indoor air quality, better health. All these things are their incentives for going green. And for the owners, meaning the people who will buy and invest in the portfolio of green housing, we need to have some kind of better returns, maybe lower capital gains taxes if they hold it for 10 years, or whatever. So I'm just proposing, in answer to your question, that it's not going to be a one at a time. You know, if we wait for each housing finance company or bank to sort of decide whether they should or shouldn't get in to this thing, then we won't make it by 2030 or even 2070. So there needs to be a fundamental market transformation. And this year, where the Prime Minister is talking about lifestyle for the environment and mindful decisions, consumer decisions, as well as the G20 visibility is a great year. This is where we need more knowledge partners, more analysis, and to be TA capacity building and to have it disseminated. So that's my answer to what it will take. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you for some more answers, though, because you touched on one of the quadrants that we actually haven't discussed much yet, which is the buyer side and the demand side. And you know, EDB, whenever we support a project, we're always looking for opportunities to promote gender equity.
Yes.
And IIFL actually has great best practices
Absolutely.
in terms of qualifying women as co-borrowers or borrowers.
Yes.
And women also play an important role in consumption purchases,
Yes.
how to spend the household budgets, and housing is a big part of that. So what can be done to drive the demand side, especially for women
From the
buyers?
women buyers or occupants in general, right? That they would seek out green rather than an ordinary house. I have some ideas here which have to do with looking at how, what does the house sort of, how is the woman's interaction with the building? And here I came across a model because I said ultimately in my view it's all coming down to business models. So there's one business model which is kind of being experimented on at the moment, not in India yet, building as a service. So even if you are an owner in the building, the idea is if you have, it's a low income housing and you have your 60 square meters or whatever you have of your space inside it, maybe we could wire the building so that you do not, everybody doesn't have to buy their own fridge, doesn't have to buy their own washing machine, because there's a challenge of whether they will buy the 1-star rated or the 5-star rated or whatever. Let's have some of these common appliances shared and super energy efficient. Downstairs, like the whole lower level, is you have shared appliances, also shared electric cooking stations. This has the benefit, so you have shared laundry facilities, cooking, and also refrigeration, and you have maybe an air-conditioned common area, common room kind of thing. And in the units you have super efficient ceiling fans. And they are of course built with the inputs of expert architects so that your energy demand overall is lowered, and you have panels and everything, solar panels. But if you have common facilities, then you can also, I mean, from a researcher's point of view, it's easier to measure how much composting was done through the common kitchen, how much water was saved, and so on. People are not then individually washing their clothes inside each of their units and using, we don't know how much water and so on. They will also feel it's more modern, that you can create jobs inside the building to run these common facilities. And most importantly, the 60 square meters will be actually more used for living area. I mean, it'll be less cramped. They can sleep, they can use their rooms, they don't have to fill it up with inefficient appliances. So I think we need some pilots like this, and how to finance these things. The key reason people don't like rental green is because when power or water or something breaks down, there's nobody to fix it, and you have very poor service quality if it's rental. So I would say this is again where we use incentives. There's a tremendous information asymmetry in terms of what materials the builder has actually used when he claims it's green. The proof of the pudding is whether this thing is still green 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later. So we need to give him a maintenance contract. The builder himself doesn't need to do the maintenance, but he needs to have a sister company, an SPV. He needs to be twinned up with someone who's going to run this and be measured for how long it stays green, and there will be some kind of success fee, some kind of bonus. I'm taking from the rooftop model This is I'm taking the sort of boot model. They only get paid if their panel is working, if the solar panel is generating. So adapting that to this, I think we create incentives. We have to delight the women. That's what I would say. You know, if you want to, because that's where all these things happen. The women are the ones who give really make the quality of life for the family. So if their life is easier, they're delighted, everything is done, and done energy efficiently, water efficiently, waste efficiently. We also have EVs, transport, you know, building is taking you to the nearest metro station. These kinds of things can be financed. But if the women's lives are made much easier, then I think it'll be a successful green building. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Some fascinating takeaways on how we need to think about collective solutions as well. So, Mr. Syed, I want to stay with the theme of finance, but financing to enable scaling of green construction. And your work at IFC is unique in that sense because you're covering South Asia, you're running the EDGE program in South Asia, but also IFC has the experience of spreading the mission globally. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about IFC's journey in this effort, what EDGE is, how it came to be, and how you're working with the industry to promote more green standards.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for the question, and good afternoon, everyone. So IFC is a development institution, and the reason we got into this space is primarily climate change, because we saw climate change as a big risk especially to developing countries like India, because temperatures change and lifestyles can be affected, economies can be affected, jobs can be affected. So while looking for the solution, we found that efficiency in buildings could be one of those good solutions. Buildings are one of the biggest contributors, but they are also one of the biggest opportunities for reducing GHG emissions which cause climate change. So we came from that angle, and when we looked at India and other economies, we found that yes, a lot of work has gone in. There are a lot of green buildings being built now as compared to, let's say, 10 years ago. But still, it's only about 5% of the market that's really going for that kind of certification. We still have 95% of the market that's untapped. Maybe some of them are not building very inefficiently, but there's no guarantee of that. So our intent was to come in and try to help the market, adapt it, mainstream it, try to scale it up, and find ways to do that through policy level interventions, through financial interventions, through capacity development, through standard setting. And that's one of the reasons we actually developed the EDGE standard, not just for India or South Asia, but globally, saying that as Mr. Ashok was pointing out, we need to quantify what exactly is a green building. That can sometimes be a little ambiguous. And if you compare performance of a building from one place to the other, you may not really get the same picture everywhere. So we wanted a very clear definition, a quantifiable definition, a measurable definition of what green is. So we came up with a very simple definition that a green building is one that uses at a minimum 20% less energy, 20% less water, and 20% less embodied energy of the construction material as compared to other buildings that are typical in that city, in that region. So it's compared against a local baseline, and there is an increment above that. The important thing is this baseline is changing. The way we building our buildings now is changing every few years. A few years ago, LEDs were not that common. Now pretty much everybody is using LEDs. So that becomes a baseline now. So every 3 years or so, we are updating the baseline and improving, bumping up the standard basically, eventually leading towards zero carbon. And as we were discussing, I think now the time has come to kind of speed it up and make sure these changes happen more frequently and the standard is increasing. The other reason why we got involved in this is because, fortunately or unfortunately, most decisions are still based on finance, on cost, on money. And most bankers did not really understand green buildings or green building certification systems. So we wanted something that they would understand easily. So this standard that I mentioned is part of that, but also working on how to get to that standard, how to achieve that standard. Rather than mandatorily require every single building to do a lot of complex calculations and trying to figure out how to get there, we think it is fairly simple to achieve green if you follow some basic principles. That there are some excellent architects in the audience who know that designing green buildings, and I'm talking about minimum standard, is actually not too difficult and not too costly as well. We know from our own examples that we worked on that you can build green buildings sometimes at a negative cost, meaning at a lower cost as compared to a conventional building. But that knowledge sometimes is not easily available to many people. So a big part of our work is focusing on developing a business case and presenting that business case in a very, very simple, easy to understand manner to all the stakeholders, to the developers, why they should do it, what's in it for them, to the buyers, to the end users so that they create demand, and to the professionals, to the architects, engineers, and even the students, and why they should be doing this. It's a career opportunity. If they don't take this up, they'll lose out on projects later in the future. So trying to present that in a very, very simple manner, and I feel that communication is an extremely important part of it. We've been lacking that. We've somehow kept that knowledge to just to a few and said, okay, these are the experts, only these people can guide. This should be mainstream. So with that in mind, we've created the system, again trying to address the market that is not touched yet. One example in that is self-built housing. So people who are building their own houses, whether it's low income, middle income, EWS housing, how much are they aware of these standards or these green principles? Now, if you look at vernacular, yes, they were all there, but if you go out and look at many houses, they've completely abandoned those very simple principles. So trying to bring that back in, but the challenge with that sector is it's just too cumbersome. There are way too many houses being built. You cannot just go and talk to each one individually. No certification body has that capacity. So we are working with institutions like IIFL and other housing finance companies on reaching those end customers so that they can be taught, and IIFL itself is doing a lot of good work with Kutumb and other awareness raising activities. How can we simplify this and enable the housing finance company to actually deliver most of the hand holding? They don't necessarily require a lot of external support. They make it as part of their standard loan process that every homeowner that chooses green will get this additional piece of advice, and they will get information that they may not have right now. They may get resources that they may not easily be able to access right now, and they may possibly get some better funding as well in the end. And in the end, it's a win-win situation for both, for the housing finance company as well as for the end user, and of course for the environment at large. So there are a lot of those avenues that are still left to be untapped. There's a lot of work needed. So I think no institution by itself can do it by themselves. We need to work on it together. And so collaboration is a key.
Definitely. I know we need to wrap up, but I wanted to take advantage of the fact that since you work across the region and IFC, of course, works globally, is there one or two best practices in terms of promoting green building standards that you've seen from the other markets that you cover? Your mic is this? If I'll just repeat the question quickly, given your knowledge and I don't think it's projecting. Did you hear the question? Okay.
Who do you want to answer?
No, that's for you. Yes.
Okay.
From South Asia or globally in IFC's work, one best practice.
I think it was mentioned earlier by Sean that one of the examples that we've seen work very well is Colombia. A small country, but a developing country like India. And about 6-7 years ago, there was just a handful, 5 buildings in fact, that were certified green. And now 20% of all new construction is certified green. How did that happen? Because a lot of these stakeholders came together the largest banks, the Chamber of Commerce, the government, and the professional bodies. They came together and, meaning they didn't really just decide one day and we'll sit down. It kind of organically grew up, and we were also involved in a certain way. And we started small. We said, let's tackle this segment first, housing first, or commercial. So there was a sequence that was decided, and gradually we increased the scope and the stringency of what those green standards would look like. So we started with the mandatory code that had the minimum standards, and gradually upped it up with EDGE and other certification systems. So the key learning from there and from the other countries that I have experience of is, firstly, involve everyone. So collaboration and simplifying the message, not complicating it. We've just got too much information there, which is not easily translatable to everybody. Like I mentioned the example of bankers, they want to know what really is green. They cannot jump into the depths of a very complex certification system. It should be quantified, easy to understand, and easy to validate as well, because there is unfortunately some greenwashing that's also happening. So there should be a robust validation system at the back end, so to build a market trust. And I think the initial discussion about incentives, there is a role for government to play, definitely, which is like in India, what BE and IIFL did for LED lighting. That's superb. It really brought down the prices of LED lamps, and that's now mainstream. Maybe we can do that for other technologies, other materials, solar panels, rainwater harvesting, or other things. There is that. I think incentives are supposed to be like a catalyst, but only for a short time. I don't think incentives are a long-term answer. There should be a strong business case. There should be demand created, and through awareness, like what we've been talking about, we can create sufficient demand to drive it by itself.
A lot of recommendations and policy actions that have come out through the discussions, but I had warned you all in advance that I was going to put you on the spot for sort of a rapid fire round. And since in the spirit of generating policy inputs, helpful, this is a policy dialogue session. So if you had to summarize one action that's key to scaling the green affordable housing ecosystem in India, and who takes the lead, I would ask each of you in turn, starting with you, Mr. Didi.
I will say that it should be market-based, that we have to create demand from the users. If they will ask for that, then automatically things will happen. Your cost, as said by the esteemed panelists, that cost is actually not the constraint right now. If you design in the right time, right manner, it will be at par with any type of construction. So only thing is that we have to create that demand. And incentive, if we are saying incentives, in what way we are looking at, whether it's a money terms that we are giving to that consumer or the advantage they are getting. So incentive, the advantage that energy cost is coming down, I'm supporting to the environment, all those kind of things we have to demonstrate, not in terms of any kind of subsidy, because subsidy programs normally go out whenever those subsidies are taken, you take out from that mechanism. So that kind of incentive we are showing them, and it is a market pull that yes, we need to do this. People want that, I want to live in a green home, I want to live in energy efficient home, then things will move automatically. So that is the scenario we would like to see in future.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Seth?
Yeah, so I think I said this right in the beginning, that it has to be consumer centric. You need to work only with the consumers, get them to believe that green is good for them, it is going to be, it doesn't cost more, it is healthier, it is in operations, it's much better, it doesn't pinch their pockets, all of that, I think. And then let there be studies to, for them to touch and feel and how it works. And I think there are enough examples, and we at GRIA do all of these things. We kind of work with the societies, with the communities, and tell them that, look, it's eventually you guys who are really going to drive this. Developers are not going to give it to you unless and until you demand it from them. The incentives that are being given to the developers are only to jumpstart the market, but they are not, they should not be there, as he rightly said. Subsidies don't make the case because the moment the subsidies are weaned away, it capsizes. So it's that the incentives are only to jumpstart the market. They get that additional FAR, but we should be very careful that you know, they should not get used to it, because if they start getting used to it, eventually it is not going to really drive the markets, and there the consumer has to play a role. That okay, subsidies were given to you, make sure that this is delivered, and the labeling programs, and then of course people like you all, even IIFL, ADB, NHB, all of them, I think they need to play a role in providing that consumer-based, you know, points, incentives for the home buyers in terms of loan and all of that. So I think that it's a combination of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Syed, one thing.
Yeah, actually I'll take two, but very quick. One is mandatory disclosure. I think, as was pointed out in earlier discussions, just being very clear, very transparent on how this building is performing, and on an ongoing basis, not just when it's designed. That's one, so that people, when they come, they can really ask, "Kitna deti?" and people can reply, "Kitna deti hai?" Second is, I would say, mandatory courses for all stakeholders, like whether it's the banking sector, whether it's the developers, whether architects, engineers. I am astounded that so many architecture schools still are not teaching sustainability in the right manner. So mandatory courses in all colleges, universities, and even organizations like banks should have mandatory courses for every single employee on sustainability, on green housing.
Okay. I think it's the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and that should take the lead. You asked who should take the lead. I think that ministry, as well as its counterparts in a coalition of willing states, because nothing will happen unless states and urban local governments are also sitting at the table. So that kind of government coalition, which has the responsibility for housing, is there. And I think that they, however, do not have the clout to convene everybody else who's needed to be sitting at the table. And therefore, I think MDBs, such as the Asian Development Bank, the IFC, others, need to help with convening the stakeholders, bring everybody into the tent with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs at the helm and their state counterparts, and then just listen to everybody's requirements and what they need, because that's how the business models get built. Once you find out who needs what in order to deliver. And the other thing is, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs should push the Ministry of Finance and SEBI to urgently create an asset class that either can be used for carbon credits across other countries or whatever it is, just within India. Create a real estate investment trust where investors will be piling in money through lenders as well, either through debt or equity or both, to create a huge stock. And then we have to shout from the rooftops the advantages of this stock. I think my co-panelists were talking about being demand pull, let everybody first come up with the idea that they want a greenhouse. I'm kind of slightly disagreeing with you. I'm saying create it first and then shout about its advantages, and people will come, because we don't have time for everybody to figure out that they want to live green from now on. So build it, force it, make it be built, and that's how that. So there are several people with important responsibilities, but I think everything has to be led by people like our Joint Secretary, who was here, and his bosses, and go and round up everybody with your help, kind of.
Dr. Kumar, last word to you.
Yeah, I think as I was mentioning, there is a lack of collaboration which is missing. I can say that because see, I mentioned that we as researchers, we do a lot of things, and when we see the finance part, we are not aware what is happening. So I think there is integration which is required from all corners. independently everyone is superpower. But when we do collectively, I do not know what will happen. So building is a very, very complex phenomena, and each expert has to play a major role, and we as 5 people, those sitting on the dais, has a lot of responsibility, and on the other side, government has to take a lead, involve all the stakeholders, practitioners, and he mentioned a correct, as I was also mentioning, demand or the disclosure, just disclosure, whatever we are doing, whatever, green or energy efficient or water efficient we are doing, it has to be disclosed to the public. I was looking at the document which is lying outside, some publications, U value costing this much. I don't think this is a good message. It has to be, the energy efficiency, how much, energy efficient it is if you apply these measures. It has to be that, not money. Money will come later. Right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a lot of recommendations to draft up, so thank you for sharing your knowledge, your views, and your suggestions to bring forward. Thanks to the audience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the moderator and panelists of our last session. We'll be now moving on to our third panel discussion for the day and the last one. This is on research and innovation in construction technologies for green affordable housing. Now, without further ado, I believe we are running a little bit short on time, so I'll be introducing the moderator and the speakers one by one. The session. So first I would like to introduce the moderator for our session, architect Ashok Bilal. He has over 30 years of experience in architecture, has developed curricula and teaching methods to address environmental issues. He's been associated with us since the beginning of the Kutumb initiative and has supported us throughout this journey. He has guided us on this path of sustainability that IIFL has taken in the past few years, and one of the significant outcomes of this collaboration with architect Ashok Bilal is the Green Handbook. This is a guidebook to develop green affordable housing in India. You can find a copy of this in the pre-function area. Be able to grab one of those for your reference if you feel like. Sir, could you please come on stage? Next, I would like to call on architect Chitra Vishwanath. She is the senior architect and managing director at Biome Environmental Solutions. She is a senior architect, and it's a multidisciplinary firm working in the field of ecological architecture and intelligent water and waste solutions. Next, I would like to call on stage Professor Shaleen Singhal. He is the Dean Research and Partnerships at the Terry School of Advanced Studies. Sir, could we have you on stage? So Shaleen Singhal is a professor and dean at the Terry School of Advanced Studies, as I stated earlier. He is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy at United Kingdom. He's been working as a visiting Fulbright fellow at Yale University since 2018. Next, I would like to call Mr. Rajan Rawal, who is Senior Advisor, Center for Advanced Research in Building Sciences and Energy, CARBS at CEPT University. His work emphasis is on energy performance of buildings in cities and architecture science education. He is a member of various technical core committees of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Power, Niti Aayog, National Building Griha Council, Green Building Certification Institute, and India Green Building Council. Really welcome all the panelists in the moderator session today, and now I'll hand it over to Architect Ashok Bilal to take it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Santosh. Well, I just want to give a little background to our issues that relate to research and innovation in green technologies for affordable housing. Just a little bit. And it's really what transpired in the morning session up to now. One question that was asked was that there's going to be a lot of urban growth, but very likely it's going to be in the second and third tier cities that much of the urban growth is going to happen. So that's a background that we want to be looking at, not the urban growth only in the big metros. The second we heard and repeated again and again is quantifiable disclosure, quantifiable information. What about? It seems that there are basically two areas. One is GHG emissions, not only in operations of the building, but GHG emissions also in the construction of the buildings and the consumption of construction materials. That's one area, a significant area. The second one is water balance. I think these are the two things that we talked about in quantifiable disclosure and the issue of innovation in construction technology. We also have now a question of selection of the appropriate technologies for different kinds of buildings in different regions, for different climates, different kinds of housing. So I think that also we need to look at. There's not one size fits all. There may be many solutions for each kind of situation. There is also a lot of indigenous knowledge that we already have in different parts of the country. We referred to the work that's being done in rural housing development, where local resource, local skills are put together to find the appropriate solution. What is the potential of that as being another route to affordable housing which is green? And thirdly, and the last of all, is the issue of research. We don't think we have all the solutions yet. We still have to find more solutions. The situations are complex. For instance, there's a shortage of sand in many places. All right. And the cost of energy and the production of buildings continues to rise rapidly as we go into urban construction. Okay. So intensity of energy consumption in urban building is continuing to grow. So this is the background. I'm going to start with you, Rajan. You have been leading research at CEPT, and you've done recently a lot of work in evaluating what has been the trajectory of construction technologies, what are the new things on the horizon, and you have something to tell us from your research.
Thanks.
Let's try this one.
Thank you. So in terms of building construction technologies, a kind of work which we did in recent years is trying to understand the performance of these technologies in terms of their ability to provide thermal comfort, and also equating that with embodied energy together. And kind of technologies which we look at is sort of, we sort of divide that in three categories. One is the conventional technologies for walling and roofing and also for glazing and fenestrations. One is emerging technologies, and third is we call it alternative technologies, which a lot of architects have explored and really have extracted maximum out of that. Now, the moment we start looking at, without naming a technology, we start looking at this, I think what is coming out as a singular learning is that selection of technology is less based on a typology, but more based on a operational method of a building. And this operational method means, are you really going to use air conditioner or really require an air conditioner for certain kind of building to function, or are you going to operate in a natural ventilated mode or in between mode, we call it a mixed mode buildings. And the selection of technology is actually based on how you will operate your building. That means that until we decide what is our baselines or where do we want to reach in terms of our either GHG emissions or operational energy or whatever, once we decide that, probably then we can look at the operational energy and then we can look at the embodied energy and selection of technology together. But it's now, if I have to sort of state one line, where should we be going? And I think I would like to put my efforts more and more on mixed mode buildings. That means we definitely will require air conditioner or rather cooling for certain period of the year or certain time of the day. But whenever is outdoor is comfortable, we must open the windows, we must try to get maximum advantage of what is happening outdoors, and hence the technology should be adopted according to the operation of the building. Thanks. If that helps.
Yeah. But let me just go a little further. What we've seen recently with a kind of a global call for technologies to meet the growing demand for affordable housing rapidly, the BMTPC had selected 5 or 6 what they call lighthouse technologies. And now we are also seeing some projects being built to test those technologies. I don't know whether any of the considerations that you mentioned have been incorporated in the selection there. And have you evaluated these technologies, and do you have anything to say about that?
We did, and at that point I would like to practice my academic freedom to state what I should be stating. None of these technology works for India. Not at the cost, not for thermal comfort. I think per city, if I really have to translate, per city we are making 1,200 furnaces for 6,000 people. Indoor temperature may go up to 55 degrees centigrade with about 48 degree wet bulb temperature. Wet bulb temperature, that means the humidity and dry bulb temperature together. We can sustain 32 degree wet bulb temperature. So I think selection of technology, as I know, was based on 2 things. One is the speed of construction, and second is economics. Or rather cost, not even economics. I think cost, if you are making 1 lakh houses versus if you are making 1,200 houses, definitely one can play around with the cost. A profit and loss balance account or balance sheet can be managed anyways. What is the true cost of this technology is not known to us. And whether all these 9, 10, whatever technologies coming out, we need to see whether in next 25 years, are there private developers adopting this technology which are being practiced right now in some of these projects? My gut feeling is probably no. Because these technologies are being promoted by certain kind of people, probably the cost which we are seeing is not a true cost. Second thing about the speed of construction, and jokingly I always say that when we are driving on the highways, we always see the back of the trucks, speed kills. And that's what is happening. That because we really want to clear our backlog of housing in a very short time, we have put the priority as a speed and not an environment and thermal comfort. And that is what is causing may cause more problems.
Well, that's a big point, isn't it? And it really means that we have to review our strategies for construction technologies development. Now coming to you, Charlene, with your experience at urban management and research at the urban scale and seeing how it's been operating across the globe, right? Coming to a developing country situation, where through the process of urbanization, we expect that the GHG emissions per capita will definitely rise, even in the building sector. How do you see, from your perspective, the role of policy in guiding technologies, construction methods in the right direction to meet this great need in a developing economy, where resources are in any case limited? What is your perspective on that?
Thank you, Akshokji, and let me just congratulate IIFL and ADB on this particular theme, because if it's clear that the footprint of affordable housing from India is going to be huge, and therefore if it is not greener, and now onwards, then we are creating a disaster. And that's why I think the theme itself is very encouraging. And let me just come back to your question, but I'll make my comments will also respond to some of the discussions that has happened in the previous two sections. First of all, from a developing country's perspective and India's perspective, we must look at the competitive advantages that we have. So we see clearly some of the G20 today. We look at the economic growth within India going forward vis-a-vis several other developed countries as well. And we see that positivity in terms of the scenario. We look at the commitments and the voice advocacy that we have been making, whether it is COP27, COP26, and several other international forums. We see the ground up or the bottom up efforts, for example, the transition from ECBC to ECBSC, these kind of initiatives, and the promises that are being made towards net zero and let's say net positive as well. By looking at these and also the enabling environment that we have, enabling policy and regulatory environment that we currently have and likely to have in future, we need to optimize on all of these. For example, ESG is one of the things that is coming, being counter arguments are there. However, important is that how do we create ESG for India or ESGI? The way we have created GRIHA for India, how can we actually translate such tools that are already there in the global market for India's benefit? By looking at that, my message now, responding to the previous discussions as well, is that we have done enough focusing on the technologies and systems for the buildings, which I consider as a product or an output. My message is that going forward, any kind of rating systems or the processes, that we start looking at the process itself as well. In addition to the building, the entire supply chain that is getting impacted or affected because of that final greener product, to what extent is that actually catalyzing the supply chain to get transformed? So it's easy to get the architects and to some extent, let's say the technical paraphernalia on the table, but there are several other stakeholders that need to be taken into account. So if there exist, in many of our discussions, we do miss either by mistakes or deliberately some of the key stakeholders which may derail the entire process. Let's say if there exists a mafia in any of the process, we have to take that into account and see what can be the solution towards that. Supply chain or the ecosystem, how do we transform that through any of our discussions will be very critical, whether it is the workmanship on ground, the developers to be responding to that. So I agree to the previous discussion in terms of the occupier or the user and the significance of the market. But my comprehension of market or the user is very different from the actual occupiers. It is all three markets that need to be transformed: the occupiers market, the developers market, the investors market. In addition to that, which we also need to focus on this transformation and how the messages go towards the policy and regulatory demand. How do we focus on the technology and the services component, and how do we bring all the stakeholders on board for any such transformation to happen? It's a systems approach that we can adopt, particularly when we are going forward in terms of research and innovation, not limiting only for the technology, but its adaptation and it's rolling out, which can create some success stories. And scalability, upscaling that is equally important. Thank you.
But in our systems approach that we say that we have to adopt, it's a complex system, and all the stakeholders in the entire supply chain have to align themselves to the end results that are desired. But there must be some catalysts and levers which you can move or place, which will enable, kickstart this transformational process, because you can't sort of predetermine the whole story and then say, oh, now we're going to do it this way. You know, it's not China. You're going to do it bit by bit. But you have to choose certain levers, certain catalysts to actually kickstart it. Which would you say are the most critical levers that we need to pull? I just want to superimpose another question on this. We talked about affordability, and we talked about additional costs, and whether it is a long-term cost or a short-term cost, we talked about additional costs. But we never mentioned land. Why did we not mention land? If anything is putting housing out of reach of the EWS and LIG categories, it is our land policy. That's what's putting it out. The land policy is leading to tall buildings, which are inherently more expensive, more embodied energy, more operational energy, less resilient, whatever way you like to look at it, and completely out of reach of EWS and LIG. So how do you bring that mafia into your, leverage? How do you do it?
Yes, I was about to say it's a subtle synonym to mafia that you mentioned, land. I think we need to focus on our low-hanging fruits first. And if that is the case, while we will, in the long and medium term, will be focusing on the, let's say, middle class cities and the class 1 cities, we have to catalyze and kickstart from our metro cities, because land certainly is one of the most expensive resource, misused and misutilized by many. If we look now into, let's say, the catalyst as the metro cities and of course larger built environment, then redevelopment that is already happening. So the catalyst is already there, will be a key for this transformation. There is still a limited, even the scientific knowledge towards greening of this entire retrofitting or redevelopment that is happening, and we see several bad examples in the landscape around us. But that's where one can really catalyze, and if you have to focus on that, not have to actually, we have to focus. Then we look at the services, starting from that in terms of the entire retrofitting and redevelopment. Focus again within that broader domain of redevelopment, some of the catalysts such as the central business districts and the commercial spaces within these metro areas that are likely to get retrofitted very soon or are already happening. We also simultaneously look at the focus on rehabilitation. We now see and what kind of models will be created for Dharavi that will clearly lay down the examples and the typology, newer typology. But this is the right time for any intervention from research and scientific innovation. That second I said is that as a catalyst again to bring key stakeholders, all very comprehensive list of stakeholders. This is what I do with my public policy students as mid-career civil servants in Terry School as well. Another important dimension in this entire discourse is, can we bring the focus also attention towards the nature-based solutions in this entire approach towards greening the affordable housing? How can we build exemplars which can be scaled up? So scalability will be critically important. And therefore, last but not the least, several intangible dimensions, perceived intangible dimensions, which actually create a lot of tangible negative impact is what needs to be addressed.
Well, we'll come back to you with some more questions, hopefully, if we have the time. But now move on to Chitra. You mentioned nature-based solutions, right? So Chitra is the right person to talk on that. Chitra, in your amazing trailblazing work of making urban homes out of earth excavated from their own basements and showing this as a as a future technology, which is truly nature-based, very low carbon, gives you great comfort, all right, has shown the way. Now, how do you see yourself being replicated? And tell us something about the challenges that you face in pursuing this very simple idea, nature-based solution, learning from our traditional past.
Thank you. And I must first say that it was all because of Bangalore, where it was possible to talk to the clients or the future owners that this is a possibility, and there was an ecosystem in place. That's the Indian Institute of Science, where we could go and discuss and understand the technique. So I would really say one thing. I think we should have CBRIs in every town. Now, in every second gear, third gear, whatever, town too, because lack of that is really the one where we can't progress with scaling up these ideas at all. But where do we test? So that was the important factor, and that was the contributing factor too, to be able to do this. And it was through also testing the fact that what is the comfort temperature inside? Why do you need a basement? Basement as a living space, not for parking cars, in really small plots. And that gives you 22 degrees centigrade throughout the year. Great for Bangalore especially, where we complain when it is 38 degrees. We can't think of what happens at 48 degrees. But besides that, what we noticed through studying it completely is that a basement which goes 1.5 meters below ground gives us earth enough for 3 more homes of the same area, or the cubic foot rather than area. So all this leads to the fact that earth is the best available material. And earth, especially, why we would like to use the earth is because below our feet, there is no biological activity happening. So use the material from there and not bring materials from really far. So I would say that I really didn't have much of a problem doing the job, because there was a supporting ecosystem of the Indian Institute of Science, Professor Jagdish, Professor Yogananda. They were very helpful, and that is what is needed in every city. The institutes have to open up. We are doing projects besides Bangalore, but we have to get our soils and the blocks tested in Bangalore, because that's where we feel comfortable about the results. We would really like our architecture institutes, engineering institutes to be doing the similar thing. It's available as a knowledge base. And it could happen in Raigad, where we are doing a project, but we prefer it coming all the way to Bangalore. We could reduce the embodied energy of testing. But if that happens, it will be so much more easier to scale up acceptance of earth construction.
Well, 2, 3 things, important takeaways. First is that you need to have scientific, technical engineering evaluation. And that is what gives you certainty and credibility, right? Second, you need to demonstrate to make sure that people can see it actually working. And once you are able to do that, then an ecosystem can grow around it, right? Let me just ask you another question. This is not about only building lots of houses very quickly. We are also signatories to the Sustainable Development Goals. The building activity in itself is serving many other purposes of sustainable development. It's not just only carbon emissions, it's also about society and so on. So from that point of view, about the nature of building activity and the processes of building, who's involved in it, how does it actually support sustainable development? That eventually is our objective, all right? We have to fight climate change, no doubt, but our objective is a sustainable development. And how does this, your method, reach out in that direction?
Yeah, so while SDGs are important, but also our HDI has to improve. And using labor-intensive construction methods help hugely. So, while speed kills, it also thrills. And that's the major issue here, because the thrill which comes from doing it really fast doesn't help. But doing it slowly, but doing it with people, and it is generator of decent income. Construction really doesn't require that you have to have had a bachelor's degree or any kind of degrees. You can learn while working. And if these constructions are also healthier constructions, where it doesn't require that you go to great heights, you are doing it slowly, and it's not generating pollution even while you're constructing, it's so much better. So that's why it's important that our materials and techniques be in such a manner that they're healthy, even while execution, while constructing.
So let me come back with that to Rajan. We've seen earth block, rammed earth construction happen. 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories. Not very rapid, but as she says, it has a kind of a holistic value. As a research institution, and if I say, we look at CBRI also, you say that you want to rationalize these opportunities so that they can be quickly adopted across the board by many other actors in the construction field, even developers. And you want to perhaps evolve these techniques to more rapid and more reliable, let's say intermediate technology kind of work. Do you see the potential of research programs that focus on this potential?
Yes. Yeah, I think many times when we talk about buildings and cities and kind of research and stuff like that, we always step back and say that since we got a independence, amount of money which we have spent in a research for buildings and cities, can we really count? Probably it might not be more than 500 crores over last 70 years. I can really put the numbers. Now, even today, when you start looking at the programs, do we really have a single program in a country where we can say that here is the research happening for buildings and cities? I'm not simply talking about resource efficiency or energy efficiency. It could be conservation. It could be something else. I think where we are sort of lacking is we don't have such kind of programs happen in the past, and hence suddenly we wake up and we need to catch up, and hence we get into these speed and thrill kind of situations. Traditional technologies or for alternative technologies because I don't have a better word, if they need to be enhanced to get to a certain speed so that we can, definitely there are possibilities. I do see that a kind of experiments people have done in last 30, 40 years needs to be synthesized, needs to be put forward, and fundamental first principle based research can happen. I do see a reasonable possibility of this. Why I'm saying is because if you start looking at similar kind of parallel programs, what happened in agricultural sector when we got independence, immediately after that we got fertilizer plants and urea plants, and through various agriculture universities. Now people are started looking at organic farming, but when they are looking at, a lot of learning has already happened and people are collating that to take it forward. I think similar kind of approach is possible. We still have people who have practiced 30, 35 years of alternative technology, nature-based solution, and so on and so forth. And I think, yes, there is a possibility to do that, for sure.
Would you like to recommend, would you give us a number of how much you should invest in the next year or the next 5-year plan, let's say, Niti Ayog, to support this research? Because I can see, I just want to put this in perspective, given the rate of urbanization and urban growth and the impact it's going to have on everybody's lives, quality of life as well as climate change, this research, which is indigenous, appropriate to our local circumstances and our opportunities, is crucial now. We should have a big fund for it.
Yeah, so, I mean, always more money is good to see, but there is also this challenge. And I'll give you an example with a couple of other professors from IITs. About 4 years back, we prepared that how much money should we ask from X department for building energy research. And we said probably about 35 to 40 crore a year for 5 years would be good amount. Department of Science and Technology did allocate that amount, but there is no absorption power. People simply do not have a capability to take that money and use it to create a better research. DST could not spend more than 21 crore out of 40 crores. So what happened is that people came back and said, you are asking for money, now nobody wants to have money, why should we have such programs? So I think it is both ways. One side, capacity building, not just in a profession, but also how to conduct a top-class research in building science, the way we do in remote sensing, the way we do in agriculture science, also needs to take place over a period of like next 5-6 years. And then probably more and more amount of grant allocation can happen. As you see, it's, and another important point is industry partnership. Right now, probably me and Ashokji or Shalin can do some kind of research, but if industry is not on board, we will not be able to scale it up. And that's where we also see one of the biggest challenge, at least in building architecture departments or civil engineering, is a credibility gap between academics and industry. Industry simply does not want to understand that, oh, professors can do something, and professors simply don't want to understand what industry wants.
Chitra is itching to say something.
But also, the academics don't come to the industry, to the professionals and discuss. Because this thing about the 22 degrees centigrade and stuff is because of Prashant Kapoor of EDGE, before EDGE was put up. That he came and put up these thermometers in the house and checked what's happening. So it has to be something where even the academia should know there are professionals doing work and they have to reach out. We are always open, I'm sure. So, yeah. But what one is talking about with land is also that the future designs have to be based on the carrying capacity. And if we're not going to look at the land in terms of how much will that land give you water, how much water will you get from that land that you can say 1,000 people can live in it, or how much of waste can be taken care of within that land and not taken outside, and also how much of material can you get from the land, and biodiversity, and if possible food. If all these are taken care of, we will have a better holistic design. But right now we just use the land for how much we can build and sell, and that will not be the correct way forwards with land also. So you have to change your policies to that.
This is a question for you, Shalini. She's asking you that question. Basically, that there is a conflict between the notion that a city is an economic engine where land is exploited by real estate for profit. That's a city, on the one hand. And on the other hand, urbanization is an opportunity for the distribution of wealth within an environmentally secure framework. That's another way of looking at urbanization. How do we reconcile these two aspects of our reality?
Yeah, thank you. Is it working? Yeah, so just to respond to that, whether it is land as a problem or air pollution, how do we reconcile? So we realize this, and the previous question, which is related to the disconnect between, in terms of communication, between the scientific research and adaptation of that, or rolling out of that. We realized this in the last several years, and just to share an example, what we are focusing on is the model of co-production, And the approach here is what we call as SPPI, the Science Policy Practice Interface. And in that, what we are testing this as a proof of concept is, first of all, to get industry on board. So Tata Trust Foundation is supporting this initiative with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm assisting them in creating what we call as an institution as ICAS, Indian Collaborative for Applied Sustainability Solutions. And here the focus is on this SPPI, Science Policy Practice Interface, because it is important that the scientific and the research-based solutions that we are focused, but that is emerging, and there's so much of that is brought to the policy domain. And the communication, how do you communicate, how do we as academicians, researchers, communicate in a language that it can be understood and adopted is critical. And then, not stopping there, how can that actually get converted into a practice for impact is important. So even in this case of land, for example, while we focus on these innovative models of, let's say, optimizing, to some degree, if I take again the most critical hotspot area of land as a resource, let's say the metro cities, the opportunity is the new layers that are coming in, let's say metro rail itself. And that is creating enough opportunities towards this densification, which is anyway going to happen. So how do we create the mixed use kind of typology that can actually optimize on land as a resource, but also is conscious on its impact towards the carrying capacity and the ecology? And that's where the brainstorming needs to happen, not only within the academicians and the researchers, but also with the concerned industry and the policymakers. So my message is that co-production is the way forward for going in this direction, where we bring the research and its impact into policy and practice.
Well, thank you. You've outlined a very major research project which is multidisciplinary in the future of urban development. Now, just
to add one more message based on this, my message to IIFL and ADB is that if we are taking this hypothesis that India is on its trajectory path forward, then certainly there has to be a white paper that we focus on going from this, which is actually looking at the green affordable housing for Asia and the Pacific. If we aspire for that, then we have to bring our house in order, and we have enough time for that. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are all academics and we are all engaged in teaching institutions, have been, right, including you and I too. Last shot, what would you say is the basic or the most major change or adjustment we need in our architectural, engineering, and urban planning disciplines, right, to make us ready? Because you are talking about there's no uptake on research. What is it that we need to do as a structure in education in our teaching institutions? Brief answers, starting with you, Rajan.
I would definitely say that not just in architecture, but also civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and electrical, at least those domains which has some big role to play in the buildings, must start thinking about sustainability or efficiency or resource. And also they must start looking at each other to understand how architects design and how mechanical engineers design, and so on and so forth. So that's one. But second, what more and more sort of discussions taking place, and people are, what I'm seeing since last 3-4 years is people are really trying to find a very quick answer for all these problems and solutions. And I probably have a feeling that it might create some more problem because we are in a hurry to solve a problem. And hence I always sort of try to convey this, that fight to climate change is a marathon. Let's not sprint it.
Great message.
Thank you. I say that whether it is in our young professionals, many of us, many of them here, or students, critical thinking is the dimension that can create change. And particularly if we look, and I reflect back on architecture and urban planning, we have actually taken a systemic approach to diminish critical thinking that comes when the student gets into a school. And why I'm saying so is that if any change has to be brought in on a long-term basis, you look at schools, anything that my kids will tell to me, perhaps there is a highly likely chance that I might change my practices. So if that change has to be brought in, it has to be the cadre, the new cadre that we are creating as architects, urban planners, engineers. We have to go away from the notion of plagiarism. And whether we accept or not, it's actually already ingrained, even in our teaching pedagogy, towards plagiarism. We adapt this entire typology of case study, which is not creating a critical thinking. Rather, it is influencing our mind towards, I would say, the inspiration, but it is actually resulting into plagiarism. And then when these architects, urban planners are in practice, we expect novelty, which may not happen because they have been trained like that. Thank you.
What I would say is that we create critical thinking, yes, but in terms of asking the students is, what is your desired future? What do you expect it to be? Yes, there will be some who would say, I want a Benz and I want lots of money. You know, we had a friend in Sept who said, I just want a small house but filled up to the brim with money. Besides that, what is the desired future? The desired future obviously is clean air, clean water. We don't have to buy water, we can drink it from any tap. It used to happen 30 years, 40 years back, but now we are not sure. And a place full of biodiversity. These are the future which we need, and as individuals, how do we design that future? It's with everybody and everything in mind.
Well, thank you. With that inspirational note, I think it's time for us, am I right, to prepare for lunch. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you to the moderator and the panelists. So this concludes session 3 for the day. I would now like to invite Susan Olson, the Unit Head Private Sector Financial Institutions Division, Unit for South Asia at Asian Development Bank, to give the closing remarks for today's event.
Thank you, Santosh. I think I'll leave it to Monu to try and summarize the real closing comments and all of the takeaways from today, because I think there's more than enough material in terms of the knowledge, the advice, the recommendations, the actions that need to still happen. There's more than enough to fill a white paper that someone should draft. I guess what I wanted to share before getting to the list of formal thank yous was a bit of a personal story, an anecdote of how ADB came to be associated with IIFL Home Finance. Because I had personally the privilege of being based here in Delhi for a few years until recently, covering private sector financial institutions at ADB's resident mission. This was going back to 2018. So in 2018, if you cover financial institutions in the private sector, you would get a lot of companies coming to pitch, looking for funding and investment. There was quite a liquidity crisis in the non-bank financial sector at that time. One day, IIFL came in, Monu came in. It was a small meeting, our first meeting. Monu and Ajay was with him, I think. And we did the standard ADB meeting, investor pitch. The CFO, the CEO in this case, we were lucky to have Monu as the CEO, goes through the business model and tells the story of how they're doing incredible things and building a book of affordable housing loans, how the loan book has grown, what the future expansion plans are for opening new branches, how they've managed to contain asset quality, credit quality in the book despite this rapid growth, and how a lot of digitization has happened to improve cost efficiency, so the profit metrics are great, everything an investor and a lender would want to hear. And then ADB did the standard round of questions as a development finance institution to ask, so what share of your book is actually for home loans and what share is loans against property? And what percent of the portfolio is really for economically weak and low income groups? And of course, we always ask, are you tracking women? Are you tracking the women borrowers, and what share of your book is to female borrowers, co-borrowers? To which I felt like had the right answer. They said yes, not only do they track, but it's a mandatory part of their credit policy, which is a best practice. It still is somewhat rare in the affordable housing industry in India. And the meeting was wrapping up, and Mona added at the end, sort of as a sidebar, oh, and by the way, we have started this initiative. We call it Kutumb. We've had our first couple of meetings. Again, this was 2018, the end of 2018, so I think there had been 2 Kutumbs at that point. And we're bringing together stakeholders to promote more awareness of green, sustainable construction, because the deficit in affordable housing is so vast, and we think it's really important that if you're going to build for this need, that more stakeholders become aware of the need to do it in a sustainable manner with some, green certification. Otherwise, the cumulative impact is really alarming. And my bells went off, of course, if you work in development finance in the private sector, as I have for many years, including in other regions before I came to Asia. There's 2 things you always hope for when you meet a client. One is that a private sector company is actually solving a development challenge, right? ADB actually is a development institution. We don't solve the challenge. We catalyze, we can inform, we can gather, we can fund, invest, but the action and the execution happens through the companies, through all of you. And here was a company taking leadership and doing an amazing job providing affordable housing solutions at scale in an informal, difficult, low-income market, which in itself is a feat. But then that bell that the company was going above and beyond to take leadership also on climate actions, which, if you've worked in affordable housing, as anyone here has a touch point with the industry, it is quite a unicorn. Right? The concept of green and affordable doesn't always go in the same sentence, and it certainly is something you would want to have in practice, but doesn't always happen in reality, and there's still far too little of it. So the fact that IIFL was even putting an initiative together called Kutumb made me say, we need to help you with that. It's not something a company should be doing alone. I don't know how we will find some money at ADB, because ADB has a lot of donor funds that we manage, and there are lots of little pockets you can tap into, but it takes some effort to find one that matches with the need of the day. So I said, please just send us more information on what your program is and how you plan to build it out if you had more support and more resources. So the dialogue started, the plan came across, and we worked on it, and we put it through ADB. We were lucky to find a donor, the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, which we're grateful has been supporting the activities, at least from the ADB side, to promote more Kutumbs. And now I guess we're at Kutumb 14. So they've been happening at a very rapid pace, especially this year, I know in particular. I just wanted to tell that story of how things began, because to see where we are now in 2022, it's what ADB, I think, would most hope for, is that the conversation is coming to the level of a policy dialogue. Because while all of the good work of all of the architects, all of the developers, all the financiers, all of the researchers and the scientists individually is important, and each of our institutions puts our grain of sand into the ecosystem to try and make it better and move in the right direction. It's really only through the systemic change at the policy level and the regulatory level that the system can help provide the needed regulations and the needed incentives so that all of the individual actors move in the right direction. So with that, I know many of our speakers from the morning who were speaking from the most eminent institutions responsible for policy making are no longer here, but I did want to pass on to thank Mr. Narayan, from the Joint Secretary from the PMIY Initiative, Mr. Bave, Executive Director of the National Housing Bank, Mr. Didi, Director of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and others who represent those stakeholders at the national or state level. Thank you for paying attention to the topic and for harnessing the power of your institutions to mobilize those regulatory and policy changes going forward so that the ecosystem can continue to grow. I also wanted to thank, although I have not been at many of the Kutumbs over the last year and a half, all of the, what you might call the technical experts, the architects, the developers, the scientists, the researchers, the professors, all of you who know what it really takes to make a building green and build a green building and implement on the ground. It's your knowledge also and your capacity to do it that makes the action happen on the ground. So it's very inspiring to see how many of you, I'll just name our speakers today, Mr. Seth and Professor Singhal of TARI, CEO of Griha, Dr. Ashok Kumar of CBRI, we have architects Vishwanath and Mr. Ashok Lal. You've all dedicated much of your careers to this topic before climate emergency became the talk of the day. So it gives hope to think that you are dedicating your talent, your energy, and your knowledge to the topic to solve a very complex and very urgent need. I want to give special thanks also to the 3 companies who have been working with ADB and on this technical assistance program specifically over the last 16 months. Once we got the money from our donor and put the plan of activities in place, there's been a very long list of things to execute. And I know the teams at all 3 have been working tirelessly really over the last 16 to 18 months to meet the goals of the program. CEPT University and Mr. Avanish Pendakar and his team actually are not here today because they are conducting one of the training sessions in Mumbai. So they've been leading on the capacity building initiatives. They are training developers, training architects, working with state building boards. They've taken the training all across India. I think there are 35 sessions that will have been completed by the time the year is over. So it's important work, session by session, but helping to scale and build capacity in the industry. We also have Dr. Rajan Wawal, of course the team at CARBS who've been leading on research and innovation over the last months. There's some important piece of work I know that's going to be disseminated further going forward where we can understand in more depth how all of the work on green building standards can be harmonized across climatic zones in India. So we look forward to those publications, and all of the work from this research innovation capacity building training materials will be put in the public domain to also make it available to help with sharing knowledge and scaling access to it. I want to thank Gravity Concepts, of course, working behind the scenes often, but to pull all these Kutumb events together, including today's event. I know there's one more big important event coming up going forward in Bangladesh in about 2 weeks' time. It's ADB who asked IIFL and other key members of the ecosystem for green affordable housing in India to share the knowledge also outside of India in South Asia. So we've helped organize a first international Kutumb, which will take place in Dhaka in a couple of weeks' time. And I know all of the work that goes into putting an event, especially when it's international. I guess I realized that I skipped over one piece of my thanks, so I'll go back to that before I come to the final piece of thank yous. I just wanted to thank also the institutions and people specifically who represent the institutions that also work as a mission globally to bring more climate finance solutions, more awareness of green building standards. Also here I'm talking about Sean Kidney from the Climate Bonds Initiative and Mr. Atif Saeed from IFC. These are institutions that ADB collaborates with a lot, and I hope we can continue to work together also to bring these forums together and find synergies so that we can catalyze more work in India and in the region. Last but not least, of course, I want to thank the team at IIFL, Monu, Ajay, Madhuri, Ravi, Santosh, and of course all of the team members at IIFL who are working behind the scenes to actually run the housing finance building, but the housing finance company, the housing finance activities. But all of you have been so personally dedicated to this mission of green affordable housing that it's really been a luxury to work with you also. I want to thank your board members for supporting you in this effort, because I know if the support and the inspiration doesn't also come from your board members, makes it harder for you to execute on these kinds of activities. So to Ms. Mukherjee and to Mr. Sridhar, who I don't think is in the room anymore, just to recognize also the importance of your support in making it possible for a company to show that actually it is possible to have some good practices and best cases in green affordable housing. Maybe it's not a unicorn after all. Yes, with that, I just want to say that as ADB, we obviously have to continue to put our grain of salt into the ecosystem. Green affordable housing will remain an important topic for us. We look forward to continuing to work with many of you and collaborating with you and finding new ways to make the momentum continue going forward beyond this Kutumb. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for patiently sitting through our sessions today. Would like to announce that lunch is being served outside, and our ADBTA summation video will be played, so you may have a look at that while having your lunch. Thank you.
Housing shortage is currently estimated at 19 million. This gap may widen further to 38 million homes by 2030. Over 96% of Indians who are looking for homes come from low-income groups, which means low participation of women in the decision-making process. Millions of homes need to be constructed by 2030 to keep up with this increasing demand, as many current homes are primitive and are not built to withstand adverse climatic conditions. Also, current housing techniques adversely affect the climate, as it accounts for over 37% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. However, there are many barriers to opt for energy-efficient initiatives, which means these emissions are only going to grow to 70% by 2050.
Fight against climate change, because buildings are the biggest consumers of electricity. Electricity, whatsoever clean it is, somewhere it is generating greenhouse gases. And if we reduce energy consumption in the buildings, we can actually reduce greenhouse consumption also.
There is an urgency to solve for the need of green affordable housing in India. IIFL Home Loan and Asian Development Bank have collaborated under the Technical Assistance Program to bridge this gap and enable green affordable housing for all. The objective is to support and facilitate the green affordable housing ecosystem in India through 3 activities. The program creates awareness about green affordable housing through its promotions. Capacity building aims to gather, strengthen and organize an ecosystem of resources for green housing. Research and innovation aims to build strategies for green housing in the future. This program, aligned with Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, can pave the way for construction of affordable green houses at scale in India.
It is as much a climate challenge, also a very big business opportunity.
Going green actually helps you build a brand. It differentiates you in the market, still offering a better value proposition. This market is a $1 trillion market per annum.
IIFL really stands out in its determination to build expertise in-house and develop a range of solutions through their Green Value Partner team.
If one decides to build green in India, a significant benefit is the access to a lot of concessional finance. However, there is a lack of awareness about how it can be made affordable. The TA program's flagship, Kutumb initiative, facilitates this by bringing architects, developers and construction professionals together on one platform to provide technical assistance, information and also explore solutions for affordable green housing. Through the Kutumb initiative, a country-wide ecosystem has been created, introducing leaders into the green building landscape.
ADB would really like for the affordable housing segment to be looked at from the perspective of green buildings and sustainability.
What is sustainable living if it doesn't take care of basic needs such as education? PUNK is an eCSR initiative which helps migrant construction workers educate their children and further their upliftment. To do this, PUNK has established 7 learning centers along the construction sites and has provided hundreds of children with formal education. Focusing on the green is Disha, another eCSR initiative that inculcates sustainable and greener ways of living among women and children of low-income homes. Disha has successfully been able to reduce footprint, control climate change, and preserve perishable sources like water and energy. The second pillar of the TA program is capacity building, which is an essential step to turn green housing ideas into reality. In collaboration with CEPT, it functions on 4 levels: policy level, state level, district level and developers. It ties together initiatives taken towards climate adaptation measures, gender mainstreaming, and provides green certification through training sessions across Indian cities for stakeholders, home buyers and policymakers.
Bring many people together, which is developers, home buyers, government agencies, MFB institutions and regulators, and trying to achieve something which is again unique.
Capacity building covers every stage of green building, from conception to certification, including key areas like design, policy discourse to provide women with green housing, project formulation and appraisal, and green building implementation. To further fill knowledge gaps in the market, the third pillar of the TA, called Research and Innovation, is working towards some key areas like 1. Creating a unified rating program to combine the multiple rating systems and bringing climate resilience in green building rating. 2. Initiating India research in green lending in affordable housing segment. 3. Solving for the lack of gender sensitivity in design. And 4. Identifying best practices, new innovative technologies so they can be mainstreamed.
Studying the existing system and finding the gaps in those. The second milestone is to talk about developing the benchmark. And the third, which is very important, is to identify the technologies that can be used in the market.
With this initiative and its awareness programs, we are connecting with